Ukraine needs long-range missile launchers and long-range artillery with ideally precise, high precision guided munitions. Otherwise, Russia will continue to move at a slow pace, but in a consistent way.
Now, the leaders of France and Germany have had an 80-minute conversation with President Putin and urged him to hold direct, serious negotiations with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron are said to have insisted on an immediate ceasefire and a withdrawal of Russian troops. But one of Ukraine's negotiators has said any agreement with Russia can't be trusted. Well, the invading forces have gained more territory across the east of Ukraine. They've taken the town of Liman, and it's thought Ukrainian troops may withdraw from Severodonetsk, where street fights are reported to be taking place. Well, we can talk now to Tymofiy Mylovanov, who is an advisor to the Ukraine presidential office and a former minister of the economy. Tymofiy, a very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Really good to have you with us this morning. Just tell us, first of all, what is happening in the east of Ukraine. We are hearing reports that Russian forces are gaining ground, that they are close to surrounding Severodonetsk.
That is correct. The Russian forces are gaining ground at a very slow pace, but steadily over the last maybe week or two, trying to encircle Ukrainian troops in the area, with Ukrainian troops retreating again at a really slow pace, and so there are a lot of losses on both sides. It's really intense fighting there. But at this point, no encircle. At the same time, the Ukrainian troops have launched a counteroffensive south, trying to cut off Kherson from Zaporizhzhia, from one of the two bridges supplying Kherson on the right bank of the Dnieper River. So that's a new development over the last maybe 24 to 48 hours.
We've been hearing some terrible stories about the loss of life along that eastern front. As many as 50, maybe 100 Ukrainians a day losing their lives. Is that something that you are aware of?
I do not have a precise verified number. I have heard this number and I believe it to be very, very plausible. And we're talking about troops. And I think we do not have information about what happens in the occupied areas with civilians. And I fear that the civilian numbers after the war could be revealed to be much larger.
And we've heard more pleas from senior figures within the Ukrainian government for more weapons, more artillery. I mean, what do those Ukrainian forces need? And I mean, are they going to be able to withstand this onslaught from the Russians?
The Russian military has changed its tactics compared to the battle for Kiev or even battle for Kharkiv. Now they send not very well-trained troops, often from Donetsk and Lugansk, to reveal Ukrainian positions. And after that, they use artillery to attack Ukrainian positions. And after that, they send more professional troops to attack those positions. It's a very methodical, very slow, very painful, high casualty rate approach, and it's working. To stop that approach, Ukraine needs long-range missile launchers and long-range artillery with ideally precise, high precision guided munitions. Otherwise, Russia will continue to move at a slow pace, but in a consistent way.
We've heard about this meeting, a telephone conversation between Olaf Scholz and President Macron of France, telling President Putin to get down to some serious negotiations with President Zelensky. I mean, what do you make of that initiative? I mean, is it realistic for President Zelensky to sit down with President Putin at the moment?
I'm not sure Putin would go for this, because the position of the Kremlin has always been that Ukraine doesn't exist, and the Ukraine fate should be decided by the West and Russia, taking the agency and sovereignty away from Ukraine. And also, we can look at the history of negotiations with Russia. The Russian government negotiates only either after a serious defeat of the Ukrainian military, or when they suffer either diplomatic or military defeat. So something has to happen, something has to break, one side has to give something, either in Kherson or in the Donetsk Lugansk area, for those negotiations to start happening in earnest. But even if that happens, the trust is eroded, obviously, on both sides. And it's hard for me to imagine how these negotiations will be successful.
But would President Zelensky be prepared to go into negotiations with President Putin?
Zelensky has recently said a day or two ago that he can talk with Putin because there's no one else to talk in Russia except Putin. And it is important for us to stop the war, but that he's skeptical about how much we can trust Putin. We need to try, but we have to be careful.
And would Ukraine be prepared to perhaps allow Russia to keep maybe some areas of the east of the country which they now control as a price for bringing the conflict to an end?
It will be, if that happens, it will only be a temporary peace, a year, 2 or 3, and then the hostilities, the war will resume. So we should also think about how the contact line, the front line, has to stay so it is stable in some way. Because what's happening right now, the just geography of it, both in Kherson in the south and in Donetsk and Lugansk, make it inherently unstable. It's very tempting for either side to try to encircle the other one. And so geography will play a role in stability. So I think we have to fight for a little bit and try to negotiate at the same time. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying we have to. It's like I would like not to. I fear it's inevitable. So while I'm looking forward to a hope of peaceful resolution, I fear that Ukraine will have to defend it militarily.
Let me ask you about the blockade of the Black Sea ports. We're hearing the UN said might be as much as 25 million tons of grain blockaded in there. I mean, is that correct? How serious is that situation?
It is serious. There's between 20 to 25 million ton of different crops, with 5 million being wheat and then corn and others. And if the blockade is not removed, then the new harvest, which will be collected in September and October, will also be impossible to export from Ukraine. There are discussions about some export happening by railroad through the western borders, but the costs of transportation are extremely high for multiple technical reasons, in particular because the railroads are different and you essentially have to unload it by hand. So it's not a very feasible solution. And so if the ports are not, are not unblockaded, then the world is facing a food security crisis. I think, unfortunately, that's true.
And what about this suggestion put forward by the Lithuanian Prime Minister that the West, perhaps not NATO, but some coalition of the willing, could get involved to try to break the blockade? I mean, is that, do you think, a realistic option? Is that something that you'd like to see?
In my view, it is. If there is resolve, if there's a political resolve, it is difficult for me to imagine how Russia would attack convoys of the European countries, which are humanitarian convoys to Odessa or to other ports around Odessa, with the sole purpose of alleviating the food security crisis.
So you think that if the West did decide to intervene, that there could be a way of doing this? Because clearly this blockade is having an effect, not just a really serious effect on Ukraine's economy, but it is affecting global food supplies, isn't it? Actually,
it is true. It's affecting the global food security supply chains more than it is damaging the Ukrainian economy in many ways, unfortunately. And so humanitarian corridors, convoys of cargo ships organized by Europe, maybe the United Nations, maybe a group of countries, with some protection, but made it clear to the Russians that it's a peaceful convoy with the sole intention of bringing food out of Ukraine. I think that might work.
We've heard that the British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has said that she supports the plan in principle. I mean, would you have a message to her and to other Western leaders?
Yes, we're very grateful to the Western leaders, especially in the UK and in the EU everywhere. But in the UK actually is one of the largest supporters of Ukraine in a very meaningful way. And so we want to ask to move forward with this plan because this is important both for the world and also for Ukraine. If Russia is able to generate a food security crisis in Europe and in Northern Africa and in the Middle East, it will destabilize the world much more.
Let me ask you then, I mean, clearly there has been a huge amount of international support for Ukraine throughout this conflict. Are you concerned that as this war looks set to grind on, that the resolve of the West and frankly the amount that they're spending to try to provide at least some of the weapons that your country needs, that might erode over time?
Yes and no. We're definitely moving from the sprint phase of the war to a marathon phase, and we know how it works. Not everyone is ready for a marathon. It takes a lot of perseverance and endurance to do that. At the same time, unfortunately, it looks like Russia is out there not just to get Ukraine, but more towards, destabilize the world order. It has a different perspective on how the future of the European and the Russian relationship should be. And so that means Ukraine, unfortunately, is just an episode. And I think the West is gradually come to understand that. And this is a scary times that we are living in. And I hope that all was left in the previous century, but it looks it's not. So we have to be ready for a marathon. And I think, unfortunately, Ukraine is just one of the episodes of the Russian aggression towards the free world, towards Europe, and towards just securing their ambition of more territory.
Tymofiy Mylovanov, advisor to Ukraine's presidential office. Really good to speak to you this morning. Thank you so much for your time.